Would the panel not consider the possibility that both governments, Belfast and Dublin, their actions and policies are motivated by fear and insecurity? That it's not just, among the wider community. The Dublin government has gone through a pretty nasty civil war. Northern Ireland government, Stormont, actually puts forward a policy of economic self-sufficiency, Sinn Féin. They dig for coal in Coal Island. They're mining ore in Antrim. And they're also doing a hydroelectric power scheme for the Lower Bann. They do an aerial survey. And people under pressure, they make mistakes. Would you agree with my reading of that period?
Sorry, I think the thrust of your question is that people north and south react from fear, under pressure in these uncertain times.
I'm particularly talking about the governments.
About the governments. These kind of fledgling governments, north and south.
They're both insecure, they're fearful. Northern Ireland government distrusts both Dublin and London. This actually does come through. Or perhaps I've got it wrong.
I think those three elements are quite important. The fear, the distrust of which I touched upon, the distrust which the Northern administration had of their Southern counterpart, particularly in the wake of the Belfast boycott, which Eamon was talking about. And also, I'm not sure about the policy. It was later, actually. It was whenever in fact, 1922, when the draconian legislation was established. I think the key weakness of this was that that legislation was just about sustainable as a temporary measure. But whenever it became a permanent aspect of governance in the northern area, it became a real weakness, and it became a real problem, not just obviously for the Catholic minority, but in many ways for the credibility of the northern government. So I think fear, distrust, policy. Maybe I think in the early stages they were thinking about very much self-interest, very much maintaining as far as they could, control of their own particular area. And it was only later in 1922 that when the Civil War started and when the Republican threat in the north went away a little bit, it was only at that point that they really got to grips with the loyalist paramilitaries, and the files do indicate that they were aware. I won't mention them by name, although I do in the book. There were some personalities, loyalist personalities, who were quite well documented, and Craig was aware of them. And at the very least, these people were an embarrassment to the Unionist establishment, and arguably they should have done a lot more about this problem a lot quicker. I think I personally would agree with that. I won't get into the road cops unless I'm pushed because it's a very difficult one, this. And last time, when I mentioned in the book, it's the only time in my life where I've ever actually been in a tabloid newspaper when the families of some of the people who were involved in this actually spoke out against my claims and other claims. So I'm going to be a bit reluctant about speaking about certain individuals, but that's why I've used the term road cops.
Certainly, there was a correlation between the intensification of violence and brutality and particular high-level massacres and political uncertainty in that whole period. You know, you can plot it against the long wait for the treaty, the uncertainty about the Boundary Commission, and that kind of thing. Now, obviously, by September 1922, the IRA have virtually withdrawn from the northern scene. You know, not just the pressures of the Civil War, but the withdrawal of support after Collins's death by the new pro-treaty government, or the Free State government of William T. Cosgrave. And it's then, as Alan implies, that action is taken against one or two high-profile policemen who have been involved in this, though one of them, I suppose we should name him, District Inspector John W. Nixon, who his name was associated with reprisals in Belfast, particularly. His name was always associated with the McMahon murders, though he was never charged and sued successfully various publications over a long life. He was a Cavan man who had been active between 1916 and 22 in other southern counties. And he was dismissed from the force in 1924 for making a political speech, became an independent loyalist MP, and became a scourge in the side of Craig and the Unionists until his death in 1949, accusing them of betraying the Protestants of Cavan, Monaghan and Donegal, among other things. But I mean, there is that connection, and a lack of nationalist confidence flows from events in the early 20s, and we have a policing problem really from 1922, particularly as the old RIC officers are retiring, they're not replaced. There isn't really a great surfeit of nationalists queuing up to join, and that becomes a kind of a permanent problem after the mid-30s. After a fairly strong, something like 18% Catholic in the RUC beginning, a transfer from the RIC, over 20% of the officers. But by after 1936, with retirements, that dwindles to single figures.